In 586 BC, the ancient people of God lost everything. A group known as the Babylonians invaded their land and destroyed all that Israel held dear. Their homes, their families, their temple, all gone. And for 50 years, it stayed that way, until God restored them. As the Israelites returned from Babylon, they began rebuilding what was once ruined. It wasn't easy. They experienced opposition like never before. They fought tooth and nail to rebuild. They took one step forward and 2 steps back, but they never gave up, because they knew God was faithful. This is the story of rebuilding from exile.
So if there's one thing that I have learned about relationships after being married now for 7 years, which I know for some of you, you're like, 7 years, I was 67 years, but for me, 7, that's a big deal. I'm almost 30, and so I feel like that's like, all right, something to win on. But if there's one thing that I've learned after being married for 7 years when it comes to relationships, is that there is a drastic difference in the context of a relationship between doing in a relationship and delighting in a relationship. Between doing and delighting. 2 weeks ago, I was reminded of this difference when my wife and I were laying in bed one night, and we were having a conversation about our marriage and our life and things that were going on, and it just kind of struck me in a really convicting way. The holidays had finished up, and the holidays in the Shaw household are absolutely insane. We travel a ton. We meet with a bunch of people. We have people over in our house, and this holiday season in particular was really exhausting because we were doing all of those things, traveling, having people over, making food for a bunch of people, doing a lot of parties. And then our family was also sick with the plague of the flu, and it was just one of those 3-week periods where it's just like absolute chaos, and we really never got to take a break until about 2 weeks ago. And I knew this. I knew going into it was going to be busy, and so my goal as a husband, as someone who loves my wife, I was like, okay, when life settles down 2 weeks ago, I'm going to do every single thing in my power to do for my wife because I love her. I'm gonna do everything I can to prove my faithfulness. And so I just started doing, literally, I was like, I'm gonna give a whole week to just being crazy, and I'm gonna do these things. And so I was super attentive to the cleanliness of our house, and I would do everything I could to make the bed, even though I'm the person that's like, why would you make a bed after you sleep in it? Because that's kind of like tying your shoes after you take them off. It doesn't really make any sense, but I'm like, no, I'm gonna make the bed, and then and if you don't get that, think about it. You go to bed, and then you get out of your bed. Why would you make it? Because you're just gonna get back in it. It's not smart. But anyways, I was like, I'm gonna do it because I love my wife. I'm gonna put the 27 pillows that are on our bed that we throw off every evening, I'm gonna put them on strategically and in an artistic fashion. And there was more serious stuff that I did too. I took the boys out on a pretty regular basis to give my wife some just reprieve, right? If you're a parent, you know exactly what this feels like. I'm gonna leave, and I don't even wanna think about my children, and so I gave her some space, and there was actually a night where she got to go with her friends to downtown Denver and hang out, and I got to spend time with the boys to give her a little bit of a break. And then there was a time when during that week, I actually made dinner for our whole family, and I was just like, this is gonna be a great family time. I'm gonna do these things, I'm gonna clean, I'm gonna care for the kids, I'm gonna give my wife a break, I'm gonna clean, all of these things. And for me, it was just I need to do everything I can to prove that I love this woman. I'm gonna do. And the end of the week came around, and life settled down a little bit, and we laid in bed, and my wife said 3 of the most convicting words that she's ever said to me. It wasn't, "You are awesome," which is what I thought she'd say, right? Because I was like, come on now, let's be real. I was doing all these things for you today. It wasn't that. All she said, she looked at me, and she's not staring at me right now because she knows what I'm talking about, but she looked at me and she just said, "I miss you." That's it. Not, how come you didn't do more? Not, you're so awesome. Not any of that. In the midst of doing all of these things for her, she just said, "I miss you." And the reason why that convicted me so much is because I thought, I'd convinced myself that every ounce of energy I put into our marriage by doing for her would prove my faithfulness and fix everything and make everything right. And I realized that in that moment, my wife didn't need me to do things for her, but what she was desiring more than anything else is for me to delight in her, to be with her. She's kind of like, in a way, saying, like, I miss you. Like, where have you been? You've been doing, but where have we been together? This relationship piece, right? This is the importance of any relationship. There's a difference between doing and delighting. And when it comes to our relationship with God, guys, when it comes to our faith with Jesus Christ, our understanding of God the Father, our relationship with God as a whole, that difference between doing and delighting is so important because God's highest priority in your faith with him is that you would actually delight in him, not do for him. It's actually a core aspect of Christianity that so many of us forget. God wants our hearts, not our hands. It's his highest priority. And today, as we jump into Haggai chapter 2, the people of God are going to be basically not graciously reminded like my wife did for me, but they're going to be smacked in the face with this reality that's what God wants for them. They've been doing, they've been working, they've actually believed a lie that what they've been doing has been granting them the love of God. And God begins to sit down with them and he goes, stop, I miss you, delight in me. This is what God communicates to the people of Israel. So we're going to start reading in verse 10. I'm going to read verse 10 through 12. And just to give you guys a heads up, for the first 4 or 5 verses of this text, things do not make sense. There's a lot of things historically happening. You're going to be like, what on earth is going on? Just bear with me as we go through this because it all makes sense as we get halfway through this section. But God starts with some rhetorical questions to provoke them to start thinking. He's actually a very good teacher. His pedagogy, God's pedagogy is always asking questions because he wants us to come to a resolution, right? Come to a conclusion. So verse 10, he starts and things are a little bit strange right off the bat. Let's read this. On the 24th day of the 9th month, in the 2nd year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Haggai. This is what the Lord Almighty says. So God is speaking to Haggai, and he tells Haggai to begin to speak, and right away he tells him to actually talk only to the priests. This is very important. He says, ask the priests. These men from the line of the Levites, the men who would go back and forth to the temple on a daily basis, they actually interceded for the people of God. They actually administered the law of God. They actually did sacrifices for the people of God to grant forgiveness. He says, ask them what the law says. And this is what he asks them. If someone carries consecrated meat in the fold of their garment, and that fold touches some bread or stew, some wine, olive oil, other food, does it become consecrated? The priest answered, no. So stop there. So right in verse 10, that very first verse that we get into this section, we're actually given some historic details, some dating things that are really important if we want to dive into what's actually happening here. If you guys haven't been around for the last couple of weeks, here's this story of the people of God. 70 years before this moment. So we know the exact date that Haggai spoke these words, okay? 70 years before Haggai was given this word, the people of God were destroyed by this group called the Babylonians. So there was this opposing nation 900 some miles away from Israel, and they showed up with this guy named Nebuchadnezzar. They destroyed the people of God, shipped them off to Babylon, and for 50 years, they weren't just exiled and enslaved and taken away, but everything they held dear back home was ruined. Their lives were ruined, their families were ruined, their crops, everything that defined them as a people. And the worst of all things happened. The temple was destroyed. The place that God dwelt with his own people was ruined, burnt to the ground by the Babylonians. This was the state of the people of God for over 50 years. And so they stayed in Babylon, they were exiled, but then all of a sudden, 20 years ago, according to what we're reading now, 20 years, the people of God were able to come back home. They left their exile, were brought back to Israel, and the problem was that for 20 years, they rebuilt everything about their lives except for the most important piece, the temple. God brings them back. He delivers them. He saves them. The promises of Jeremiah 29:11, I will prosper you. I am in favor of you. I've got plans for you. They come back and they think it's all about them. I got to rebuild my life. I got to rebuild my foundation. I got to build my life up to exemplify my own glory. And for 20 years, they forgot about God. They're like, thanks, God. Love you. Now I'm going to go do my own thing, right? And so for 20 years, the temple lied in ruins. He delivers them, but they totally forget about his basic foundation, what's going on. And so in October of this year, Haggai begins to speak in the very first chapter in Haggai. And in October of that year, God tells his people, it's time to get your butts in gear. Stop forgetting about me. Stop forgetting about my temple and prioritizing yourself. Rebuild. Prioritize me. And so they start rebuilding. They get this energy to start rebuilding. But then 3 weeks later, in the month of November, this is Haggai chapter 2, verse 1, the people of God become discouraged. They realize that rebuilding their lives to follow God is very difficult. You ever felt that? Following God is not easy, especially when we have to deal with the rubble of our past. It's hard. We have to sift. We can't just forget about everything. And so they deal with this tension, but God says, keep going. It's going to be worth it. I'm going to be with you. And now, a couple weeks later again, now we're in the month of December. This is on the 24th day of the 9th month of the second year of Darius, this is a fancy way to basically say, in the month of December, the month of December for the Jews anyways, in their Jewish calendar, and 3 months after this project begins, 3 months after they start rebuilding, God speaks to Haggai, but the way he does it is he asks them a question. He asks the priests in particular an interesting question. Do you see what he asked? It was in verse 11 and 12. We're not going to read it specifically, but he basically comes up to the priest and he goes, hey guys, I got a question for you. It's Jeopardy time. Well, not Jeopardy, that would not make sense in this story. But anyways, I was starting to think of a game about questions, but whatever. So he comes up to him and he's like, here we go. I have a question for you. A little riddle, so to speak. You guys know the law more than anybody else because these are the priests. This is a big deal. You guys know all about holiness. What if you take the consecrated meat and you fold it in your garment, because that's what you're supposed to do as a priest, and all of a sudden you accidentally rub up against something? Like you rub up against a pot that's like built like brewing stew. It's a pretty practical question. And he says, do you think that the consecrated meat will then impart its holiness, if you will, to the other meat? And the question, they already know the answer, and they go, no, well, of course not. That's not really how it works. Now, when we read that, let's just be honest with ourselves. I don't really think many of us know what the heck Haggai's talking about, right? Like if you're reading that, consecrated meat, fold, going, can consecration be imparted to the other thing? They say no. I don't think that we're going like, oh, I know exactly what Haggai's getting at right now. Right? This is how we should read the Bible. This doesn't make sense to me. I'm not going to find, you can't just all of a sudden be like, oh, but I see the word consecrated. Yes, Lord, I am consecrated to you. No, that's not how you read the Bible, right? You ask questions. You provoke yourself. You wonder. So we're going, okay, let's be honest. Even me, master's degree in biblical theology, I kind of go, I don't really know what's happening here. I have to research, right? So here's what the Israelite priests would have done for years. They would have, every single year at this time of the year, they had this great festival and they would sacrifice for the sins of the people of God. They would take this perfect, non-blemished calf, and they would slaughter the calf and take its best meat, the prized meat, and that meat would have been for God. They would have taken the blood of the lamb, they would have splattered it all on the altar and on the mercy seat, but they would have taken this meat and they would have what's called separated it for the working of God. So consecrated just means to separate, to take from ordinary and make it holy, to make it worthy of the eyes and pleasure of God. That's all that this means. This is where we get our word for sanctification. To be consecrated means God is going to do something in you different than he's ever done before, okay? So they would take this meat and set it apart for God, but then they would be fearful. They'd go, well, nothing unclean can touch it now. right? Like if it's been set apart for God and it's been cleansed and ready to go as an offering to the Lord, we have to protect this thing. So they had these little folds in their garments as priests, and they would put the meat in and they would walk around to protect it from like sinful people like us, right? They'd be like, no, get away from the meat. And they would go and then they would place it on the altar for God. This would be how the people of God received forgiveness. This was a very important process. And so Haggai knows this, goes to the priest and says, you know this whole process. Let me ask you a question. Can that piece of meat impart its holiness to anything it touches? Bringing the question even lower for us, can you rub up against something that is holy and then just become holy? Can you do things that look religious and then become faithful and honorable and favored in the sight of God? Can you show up to church and do Christian things and all of a sudden just boom, like just start glowing in holiness? Right? This is the question he's asking in their own way, because this is how they understood holiness, something set apart, something beautiful. Can you rub up against it? And their answer is no. You can't become holy by proxy. You can just stand next to a really holy older person, right? Like our elder Rick, like I can't just stand next to him and then just like be like wisdom and holiness. And that's not how it works, right? We know this intuitively. He's asking this question. This is like this piano of Sam's, this beautiful piano. So when Sam touches this piano, just holiness emanates from it, right? It's just beautiful. And you just wonder, like, what kind of power does this, look at it. My son's favorite color is red. He thinks this is a piano from like heaven itself. Like he knows he's not allowed to touch it, which makes it seem even more like, oh, it must be like God's piano kind of a thing, which is super funny. But think about this piano. What comes out of this thing is just beautiful. And you just have to ask the question. I have to, like, what if my hands touched it? Do you think something beautiful would come out of it? Is that Rachel that said that? Yeah. I have never played piano in my life. I have never taken a lesson in my entire life. But let's just think. Let's try. Ooh, it's on. Good. What do you think? Should I just start playing? Will it just like instantly sound good? Whoa. I'm cheating. The trick is that if you play all the black chords, they're all in the same key, so you can't mess up. But if I actually played something, I don't know if this is a C chord. It didn't work, right? Like I have never actually taken, my wife knows how to play piano, I don't. The only cheat I know, black keys, but the reality is, it's not like the set apartness of this can't be imputed to me. We all know this, right? This is intrinsic into how our brains think. Nothing is weird happening here. And so Haggai just asked this question: can holiness transfer? No. Okay, that's a great question. Faithfulness of God doesn't just impute on us just because we walk into a holy situation or we do holy things. He asked this question, and then he doesn't stop there. So the question's a little bit strange. We're not really sure what he's getting at yet, right? You're like, okay, what's the Lord doing? Well, in verse 13, he doesn't stop with just that question. He asks another question of the people of God in reverse. Same exact line of thinking, but he asks a different way. Look at what he says here in verse 13. Then Haggai said, if a person defiled by contact with a dead body, so in the Old Testament, there was this law that if you touched something that was dead, you became defiled. You became something that was unholy, that thing needed to be separated, right? And so he's saying if somebody touches a dead body, an unholy thing, makes contact with a dead body, touches one of these things, does it become defiled? And then the priests reply, yes. It becomes defiled. So soon after Haggai asks them the first question, can holiness be imparted to you? No. That's not how it works. Holiness by proxy, not okay. Then he goes, well, but can unholiness by proxy occur? Can you rub up against what is defiled and then actually become defiled? And they actually answer the question, yes, according to Jewish law, yes, you can be unholy by proxy. Now, if we're being honest with ourselves as Westerners, as individualistic Western, most of us Americans, we do not like a statement like that. We don't, whether you're a Christian or not, the concept that you could you could be in the proximity of what is unholy and then therefore actually be declared as unholy, we go, I don't like that, right? What do you mean? No, it's my life. I do what I want. I think the way that I think. No. God's grace is so much greater than what I do, who I'm around, whatever it is. That's not, like, we don't like this. Even if you're like Bible believing, like, yeah, I believe every word of God. This is one of those things you're like, oh, but really? Maybe this is an Old Testament law we should totally disagree with, right? Just like move on. We often think that we can rub against holiness and get it, but not when it comes to unholiness. And the reason, like, and the default kind of thing that happens when we go to this route, we think it's my life, it's my holiness, don't judge me, I can't experience unholiness when I rub against somebody. When this happens, the natural byproduct of that is that Christianity and the church becomes completely unattractive to the world, and the message of the gospel becomes dull. And the reason for that is very simple. We start communicating with the world, and this is literally the problem with evangelical Christianity in America today. This is why our world wants nothing to do with Jesus. It's because we communicate by our actions that we actually believe that we can experience holiness by proxy. So what do? Everything religious that we can think of. We go to church because that's what you do. We read your Bible because that's what you do. You pray and you give and you post your, Instagram Bible stuff, and we act so holy Monday, or Sunday through Saturday, or on Sunday mornings, and we go, this is the life of God, and I'm going to do all of it. But then in our hidden life, we actually don't want God to tell us who we live with, who we sleep with, what we think about, what we actually do when we're giving, anything at all. We want this weird separation of, I want to act like a Christian in one day of my week, and then I want to act like the world, and we go, and none of it's going to negatively affect my love for God. This is the world. This is the problem with Christianity right now. Most people in our world, if they ask a Christian, like if they meet someone, they go, oh, you're a Christian, they are actually shocked by it. It's sad. I actually heard a story once. We were at a conference, and this older gentleman, he's from Australia, and he's talking about being missional and being on mission for God. And he said that he had a coworker once who all of a sudden just got like emboldened in his faith. He's like, I'm going to start sharing the gospel. And so he went into his workplace, and he's like, guys, I want you to know that Jesus loves you. And one of his coworkers, he was like, wait, you're a Christian? And he's like, yeah, man, I'm totally a Christian. And the guy responded to me, he said, I don't want to become who I've seen you be. The guy had been watching him. This coworker had been watching this man for years working together. And now this guy all of a sudden decided to say he was a Christian. And the representation that he gave him for 10 years was that this man goes, I want nothing to do with the life that you live. And it wasn't because it was judgmental. It wasn't because it was something like that it was countercultural. It was because this man was no different. This is the problem with Christianity right now. The vigor of the church has been lacking because we believe this lie that we can be holy by proxy, and then we can be as worldly as we want, but it doesn't actually negatively affect us. This is what Haggai's asking these questions. He goes, hey, can you get this? No. Can you get this? Yes. And so he's drilling these people. Now the question we need to ask ourselves is, why is he drilling them? Right? Context is key. The Bible is a narrative, so everything makes sense. Everything falls in line. Right? So if we're reading this story and we're going, hold on, this just seems like God walked into the room and is just like pounding his people. Why? Why is he asking this question? Well, we actually have the answer in verse 14. Why is God deliberately speaking to the priests and challenging them? Look at this, verse 14. Then Haggai said, "So it is with this people and this nation in my sight, declares the Lord." This is important. Whatever they do and whatever they offer there, speaking about the temple, is defiled. Let me put this in perspective for you. From the moment the people of Israel came back from exile and they were inspired to rebuild the temple, things were not easy in the least for them. Like, we know this historically, not just in the Bible, but extra biblical literature. We know it was hard work for the Israelites. The Persians wanted them to cease at every step. They did not want the Israelites to grow and to build a temple and to become a nation again. They kind of paused it over and over again. The Israelites had to fight their own disparity, their own brokenness. Like, man, this work of God is hard. They had to remind themselves over and over again that even if the temple didn't look as beautiful as what it used to, it was worth it. Every step of faithfulness was incredibly difficult for them. This is the narrative of all of our lives. Every step of faithfulness towards God doesn't come easy. It is so hard to follow God. They felt this angst, and because of this kind of frustration that came with following God, what ended up happening is that as they started rebuilding the temple, as they started laying the foundation with every single brick that was placed, set apart for God, and with every single wall that was built up and every precious artifact placed into the temple, they started to believe the lie that as they were doing holy things, they then became holy. Life's hard, I'm following God. You know what the resolution to me feeling this tension with my relationship with God? I'm just going to do more for Him. I'm going to do things that seem holy, and then I'm going to enjoy the benefits that come with God. They're struggling with the whole history of humanity, which is legalism, right? If my relationship with God is waning in some way, I have made a mistake, therefore I should do something to fix said mistake. I have gotten a sickness, now I need to do something to earn the favor of God. I am struggling with some sin, therefore if God's probably upset with me, I should do something. This is our default, right? This is what so many of us do. I gotta earn from God, I gotta do these things. And they started to believe a lie that we all believe. If I do what is holy and I rub against what seems to be righteous, I'll be okay. Every brick they laid, every offering they provided, it was pointless to God. It was defiled. And He's saying, you can't, so upset with His own people. And so in verse 14, He literally says to them, whatever they do, it doesn't matter. Whatever they bring to me, it doesn't matter. Why? Because He doesn't have their hearts. They're doing. Their hands are so active, but He doesn't have their hearts. Friends, I need you to listen to me because this is so important. This is so important to your faith. And if you don't grasp this, Christianity and following God will be so miserable for you that eventually you'll give it up. Listen to me. What you do with your hands will never matter to God unless He has captivated all of your heart. What you do with your hands will never matter to God unless He has captivated your heart. Now, your first response to that should be utter joy. I don't know why you're not freaking out right now. Maybe internally you're like, oh, that's good. I don't know. Maybe it's just way too early. What you do with your hands will never matter to God unless He captivates your hearts. This means, guys, that it doesn't matter how much you do for him. It doesn't matter what you provide religiously. It doesn't matter who you serve. It doesn't matter what you do on a daily basis, how many Bible passages you memorize, how much you give, how much you serve, how much. If God doesn't have ownership of your desires and your passions and what makes your soul, then he sits there and he goes, why are you giving this stuff to me? God is not impressed with your religious checkbook, guys. God is not impressed with the list that you think that he is demanding of you. He's sitting there going, how come I don't have you right now? Which is actually the very thing we all wish he would say, right? In the midst of us doing things, we feel that burden and we're like, oh, I hate doing this, but I really wish God would just love me for who I am. And he's like, I do. And you're like, man, well, it looks like I gotta keep doing stuff. And he's like, God is infuriated with his own people, not because they're not doing enough, but because they haven't given their lives fully to him. And he's like, it doesn't matter anymore. What they have touched has defiled them because they think it's making them holy, but in the end, I miss them. My intro makes sense now, doesn't it? Doing and doing and doing and doing and doing to the point of exhaustion. And God is just sitting there tapping. Friend, where's your heart? How come I don't have your passions? How come you haven't entrusted me with your whole life? What are you doing? God is not impressed, guys, with what we do. Never. Like there is somebody in hehuman history that has read their Bible more than you. Just letting you know that, right? There is somebody in human history that has served more than you. Like he's not like, wow, my goodness. The whole Bible every year? Look at you. No. He's like, man, some other dude like straight up like translated it in the 1600s and then died for it. Can you do that? You know? That was a history joke, by the way. He's not impressed. So he says, whatever they do, whatever they offer is defiled. Guys, what if God was speaking to you right now, saying to you simply, I miss you? Would you be okay with that? So what are the Israelites to do, right? So this is a huge question. They get challenged, they get provoked, they get asked these rhetorical questions. They realize, what are we doing? We're trying to earn the favor of God. And so what are they to do? What are we to do? Right now, what are you supposed to do? Well, we do because we delight. We do because we delight. That's what God tries to teach them. Look at verses 15 all the way through 19. Now give careful thought to this from this day on. Consider how things were before one stone was laid on another in the Lord's temple. When anyone came to a heap of 20 measures, there were only 10. When anyone went to a wine vat to draw 50 measures, there were only 20. I struck all the work of your hands with blight, mildew, and hail, yet you did not return to me. Talking about his invitation to relationship, declares the Lord. From this day on, from this 24th day of the 9th month, give careful thought to the day when the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid. Give careful thought. Is there any seed left in the barn? Until now, the vine and fig tree and pomegranate and olive tree have not borne fruit. From this day on, I will bless you. So that night that my wife and I were laying in bed and Brienne said, I miss you, what she was trying to communicate to me was a higher priority for her, right? So she's sitting there saying, I want you. I want you to delight in me. And it was in the midst of what I had been doing for her that she was saying this, right? That was the context. Her priority was not my actions, but it was my heart. But let me ask you this. How do you think the conversation would have went that evening if I, for an entire week, did absolutely nothing, how do you think that conversation would have went? If instead of cleaning and caring for the kids and taking, letting her have a night off and all of these things, if I instead left dishes in the sink, never cleaned, came home late from work, fell asleep on the couch every single night, threw my laundry on the living room, did nothing to communicate my faithfulness, and then all of a sudden on Friday night while we were laying in bed, I looked at her and I said, I love you, babe, give me a kiss. How do you think that conversation would have went? I love you, babe, give me a kiss. You know what she would have said to me? My wife is very clever. She would have said, give you a kiss. How about I give you a vacuum? Right? Are you kidding me right now? There's this weird thing when it comes to relationships, right? There's this marrying that happens where there's doing and delighting. There's doing because of your delight. If all I do is nothing and then expect this reward of a relationship, obviously that's not going to be healthy. But then if all I do is doing and then there's no delighting at all, that's not a relationship. That's this robotic thing that's happening here. You do out of faithfulness and then you delight because of faithfulness. And that's what God is trying to instill in the people of God in verses 15 through 19. He looks at them and he says, hey, look at what your life has been like all this time you've been doing. Even before the temple was laid, you would go to work, you would do all these things, and nothing would happen for you. There would be no reward because I never had you. You never came to me. But then he says, but now take careful thought to your actions. He says, I want you to go back to the grain storehouse. He's basically saying to them, it's already been harvest season. You came up empty. Is there anything left after all this work that you've done? So they go back, and then he says, plant it again, and then I will bless you. Do you see what he's trying to push them towards? He's not saying to them, okay, now here's the basis of our relationship. You need, okay, don't do anymore. Just delight in me, because that's now a misnomer, right? We've all met people. We've all heard of people who say they're Christians. And then in the end, when you meet them, nothing about their life exudes any relationship with God at all. But in theory, they say they're Christians. And he's going, hold on a second. You can delight in me, but I still want you to do, but I want you to do it for the right reason now. You have been doing and doing and doing to earn my favor, and I never blessed you. But now think, come to me. And now that you're with me, let's do something together. Go back to the storehouse, plant, and now I will bless you. God is telling his people to do because they delight, to marry the two together. To come to him with absolutely nothing and say, I've only got you to do that, and then respond to him in faith. Guys, this is the essential, this is the core of discipleship with Jesus. If you choose to follow Jesus in faith, this is the core of it. Every single day of your entire life, Jesus will call you, he will invite you into a deep relationship with him. And then in that same breath of saying, come to me, come and follow me, he will then take a step and then go, now go with me. And we so often default to one or the other, don't we? Come to me, come to me. And we're like, yes, I will come to you and I will listen to you and I'll hear you and I will delight in you. And we become this bloated Christian, this sponge of all this spirituality that just needs to be squeezed, but we won't let him do it. Just let me delight in you. This love-struck lover, right? Oh, I just want to spend time with you. Yeah, you need to go do something. But we become the sponge of spirituality that needs to be squeezed. Or our default then, if that's not it, is we do. This is the constant missionary who's always burnt out. This is the person who always signs up to serve in the church and always feels utterly exhausted. This is the person that transfers from church to church to church to church. And they always say it's the church's fault. But in the end, their depth of their relationship with God is only this big, but they want to keep going. And they blame it on the church. They blame it on being burnt out. They blame it on whatever. We all default one to the other. I don't know which one you're at. always delighting or always doing. But Jesus calls us to be invited to both. He says, come and delight with me. And then let's go do together. And the way that he more often than not provokes us when he convicts you is he simply comes to you and he says, I miss you. And when he says that, man, oh man, does it sting. Last week when we had our response time and people were coming up to the front and they were kneeling and they were praying, I was just sitting on the front of the stage, and the whole time I was like, I got to pray for people. I got to do all this. And people need healing, and God needs to heal people over here. We need to pray for. And I was sitting there, and I just felt like the Lord was just saying, like, Josh, can't I heal you today? Like we just default to the other so much, right? But maybe Jesus is telling you right now, this morning, he's just saying, I miss you, dude. Dudette? Gotcha. I miss you. Man, I don't know about you, but I wish Jesus woke me up with those words every day. This is not fanciful, like emotional Christianity, like, like the strong men in this room, like, this is annoying you. Like, you need to tone your manhood down a smidge. Jesus is allowed to miss you and call you. He's inviting you. This is a relationship with Jesus. Now, you know what's really interesting? I'll finish with this and then we'll respond in prayer. I love how in the very beginning he asks these priests, he says, hey, can holiness be transferred? And they go, well, no. And you're like, yeah, that totally makes sense until you get to Jesus. Until you actually see that for all of human history, there was this belief that you couldn't rub up against something and experience holiness. You had to be holy. But then all of a sudden, Jesus comes on the scene and just shatters that notion. In Mark chapter 1, I don't have it in the scripture or the slides, but it's one of my favorite stories in the entire Bible. Mark chapter 1, Jesus' ministry just starts, and this leper, this man with leprosy, a skin disease, runs to him. And leprosy was considered one of the most, not only medically disgusting diseases in history at that point in time, like they couldn't heal it, they couldn't fix it, you died. But it had a spiritual component to it where the people believed that a person with leprosy was unclean, unholy, unworthy, untouchable. They were the definition of uncleanliness that we're reading in Haggai 2. And this man with leprosy runs to Jesus. He's not allowed to do that socially. And he falls to his knees to him. And he looks at Jesus and he says, if you are willing, you can cleanse me. Saying, if you are willing, you can take what is unholy from me and you can give me your holiness by just a touch. And Mark says that as Jesus looked at the man, he was filled with so much compassion for him. I love that. Did you know that Jesus looks at you in your unholiness and he is not stewing in anger, but he is filled with compassion, going, oh, how I want to cleanse them. Oh, how I want to heal them. And then he looks at the man, and instead of just touching him, he says to him, I am willing. And then he imparts his holiness to him. That's the story of the gospel. A bunch of unholy people trying to delight, but still realizing that we are unholy, and Jesus goes, I will grant you my holiness. But all we are called to do in that moment, our doing, is we do what I'm doing. We run to him and we kneel. You say, Jesus, you got to give me your holiness, dude. Please. That's the invitation that God's giving us this morning. As we respond in prayer, Pastor Ethan's going to lead us in how to respond. I wanted to encourage you to model what the man in Mark 1 does, where we come to the front and we kneel and we say, Jesus, I'm delighting too much and call me to something. Or Jesus, I am doing way too much. Help me to delight in you. I miss you. And God will respond back. Delighting in doing. Let's pray.